Alright guys, welcome to another video. Today we're going to talk about how the special inscriptions actually changed my understanding of the game. Before we start, I do have to give credit to Seawill. He made a video about this a little over a month ago now. When I watched it, I thought it was really cool. I learned a lot. And at the same time, I didn't realize that because he speaks Mandarin, right? He's Chinese. And even though there were subtitles in his video, maybe there's a lot of English speakers I didn't get to learn about this. So a lot of what I'm going over is something you already covered, so I do want to give him credit. So let's actually get started. This formula up here, I posted it many times. It's courtesy of Wick Gaming. Essentially, it's showing how number of troops and attack interact with health and defense to come out with a number. The reason why he chose a damage factor of 200 is because if you look in the reports, when you launch a basic attack, it comes out to a 200 damage factor. On the field, the white damage that you see is going to be around 400 damage factor because it's going to be your basic attack, and then when the enemy launches a basic attack, it's going to include your counter attack. Not a lot of troops have counter attack damage. If you have high counter attack damage, it's going to be higher, right? But in general, just think a white damage is going to be about 400 damage factor. And then when you look at like active skills that have direct damage factor, let's just say it's 2000, then it's going to be 5x white damage because 2000 is 5 times 400. Right now, that's not including any kind of skill damage increase or skill damage boost, and we're gonna start covering that. So, tried and true YSG, right? His fourth skill, really powerful. The commander's troop deals 50% more skill damage. So I'm just gonna use 1000 damage factor from now on. I know YSG doesn't deal 1000 damage factor, but 1000 makes it like an easy number for people to follow and understand. So if you increase 1000 damage factor by 50%, right, you multiply that by 1.5, the damage factor is going to come out to 1500. So that's very straightforward. And if you take Nevsky, right, you look at his fourth skill, right, the primary commander will get a 25% increase to skill damage. So he's going to deal 1250 if you're scaling off of 1000. The secondary commander is actually going to get a trigger skill bonus. So S is going to be another additional 35%. So 25% plus 35% will come out to 60%, or on the screen, right? It's going to be 1600 damage factor. Now, here is where we get into the material that Seawill covered. I think from what I was told, in Mandarin, the wording of it is a little bit easier to get. And that's how he was able to start doing some testing and figure it out. Now, what I'm covering here in his video, you could go check it out. He actually does some testing to prove it, right? So this part, he actually used testing to prove. So if you look down here in this black line, right? 1000 times 1.5, we covered this with YSG, is going to be 1500 damage factor. Now the purple, if you're doing what we're used to, the 2.5% more skill damage of all types, right? So that's a daring and a inscription also. If you take 1000, right, and then the damage factor is 1.5 plus 0.025, or essentially 50% plus another 2.5% to come out to 52.5%, times 1000, you're going to get a 1525 damage factor. But when you're actually calculating a boost, right, so one of the new rare inscription, Focus Fire, gives you a 4% boost to skill damage. It's actually not adding to the 50% increase. It's actually taking that number and then multiplying it by additional 4%. Right? So when you're dealing 2.5% more skill damage, you're actually adding 2.5 to the 50. When you're doing a 4% boost, you're actually multiplying the 1.5 by 1.04, or 104%. So it will come out to 1560 damage factor. And if you want to do the equivalent of that as far as a more skill damage dealt, it's actually 6%. So even though it's a 4% boost here, it's actually going to be 6% more skill damage, or the equivalent of 6% more skill damage. This boost actually scales off of the skill damage increase that you have, right? So not only do a lot of commanders have skill damage increase, but obviously we have the skill tree. And even in like the different troop type trees, there's different skills that will increase the skill damage. So the boost is essentially a lot more powerful than we thought it was going to be. The only time it's less powerful, which right now in the game it's not really possible, is if you're getting no skill damage increase, right? And then you're actually getting skill damage reduction. So if you're dealing less than 1000 damage factor, even though you're starting from 1000, then the boost will technically be less effective, but I don't think that's actually possible in the game right now. Okay, now this is actually where it has bigger implications for me and really change how I understand the game, is actually on the defensive side. So before, and if you just look at the language, right, when you take 2.5% less skill damage, I just thought whatever skill damage you take, you just times that by 97.5%, where you take less, right? So a lot of these commanders like Saladin, Lucia, like the commanders where you're taking less skill damage, I thought if you're taking, for example, 1,000 damage factor, you're just going to multiply that by 0.8 or point whatever, subtracting the percentage. But once I saw this language, and Seawill talked about this too, I realized taking less skill damage is not as effective as I originally thought it was. Now, I do want to caveat this. He did not actually prove this in his video with field testing, even though he did present it this way. It does make sense that this is probably how it works, but we don't actually have field proof for this. And I actually kind of understand why there's no field proof, because if I wanted to prove this, it would be a lot harder. I would have to actually think about how to set up essentially an experiment to prove this. But for the most part, this is how we think it works. Okay, so if we go off of the baseline again, 1,000 skill damage, right, times the 50%, the YSG 1,500 damage factor. If you take the purple on the left, right, this is what we're used to, you're essentially going to take the 50% minus 2.5%. So it comes out to 47.5%, where you're multiplying it by 1.475. The damage factor is going to come out to 1,475%. 1,475. Right, now if you take the damage resistance, and I actually pulled this from the hollow square formation, just because there's not a lot of skill there. Actually, I can't find one. A skill damage resistance. There's just damage resistance of the wielder's troops, right? This is from the hollow square Tenacious. Instead of taking the 50% and minus 2.5%, you're actually taking that 50% and you're multiplying that by 98%, right? Or 2% less than 100%. It'll come out to 1,470. So even though on the screen here, you're taking 2.5% less skill damage on the left, and then your damage resistance is only 2% on the right, this armament on the right, or this inscription on the right, is actually mitigating more damage, right? Because essentially what it's actually doing is it's the equivalent to taking 3% less skill damage based on the damage factor, and then the boost that it was already, the skill damage increase is already getting, if that makes sense, right? So on the left, you're going to subtract that from the skill damage increase. On the right, for the resistance, you're actually multiplying that as a percentage. And just like what I presented in the page before, for this one, the only time that the damage resistance is going to be worse than taking 2.5% less skill damage is when there's somehow a way to mitigate the original damage factor. So if you're starting out at less than 1,000, which again is not practical, and I don't think it's really even possible for anything in open field right now. Okay, so just to kind of sum this up, the formula, right? There's A, B, C, and D. A is the original damage factor. B is the skill damage increase minus a skill damage reduction, right? So, and then C is a skill damage boost minus the skill damage resistance, or the damage resistance. And then finally, I didn't cover this, C will also present it this way. Then finally at the end is going to be all damage increase and reduction, right? So if I actually just made this really simple, all this red right here, it'll just be A times B times C times D. That's a formula. Okay, and because of the way this is structured, unless the original damage factor is less than what it started with, which again is not really practical or possible, the one at the end, all damage, is actually going to make the biggest impact. All right, so what this actually changes for me is I didn't think all damage was all that great, to be honest. In armaments, I would have preferred health over all damage, but after figuring this stuff out, now it changes how I view all damage, because after all the addition, subtraction from the skill damage reduction and the resistance, the all damage actually boosts the final number after that. It's going to be a lot more powerful. And then also same thing with all damage reduction. Okay, so how do we make this practical or sum this up? First, special and rare inscriptions are even better than they first appear. Because if you look at Hunter, if you look at Destructive, if you look at all these special inscriptions and the rare inscriptions that just came out recently, they actually, a lot of them use the word boost or use the word resistance and what they're doing to damage. Okay, so that's going to be more powerful than skill damage increase or skill damage reduction or normal damage increase or normal damage reduction as we knew it. The second one is that the skill tree is now, it's just pretty clear, it's going to be significantly better than the support tree, because the skill tree increases skill damage and the support tree reduces skill damage, right? That's that number B. So let me just go up here. That's right here, the second line B, right? So that doesn't change. If it's just that by itself, I would actually still prefer the skill tree. I mean, the support tree. But now, because of special inscriptions, now there's an understanding of how those work, and also rare inscriptions, there's a lot more boosts to skill damage or all damage or normal damage than resistance to damage. Okay, so basically there's a lot more factors where things could skill off of increased skill damage than to actually skill off of skill damage reduction. So it tips the scale in the skill tree's favor. And then finally, I mentioned this before, all damage and all damage reduction is even better than we thought, or even better than I thought. Maybe you guys knew different, right? So for example, Alex's expertise, where 3 targets, was it 3 targets? Yeah, 3 targets are taking 30% more all damage for 4 seconds. That's ridiculous. Okay, it's so good. And I think at this point, I made a video about Gorgo and Luce after talking to War Daddy Chasky and his opinion on it. I actually think I'm just going to stick with Alex just because he's even better than we thought he was going to be. ZL, Zhuge Liang, his active skill is going to reduce the all damage dealt. He's going to do damage reduction of the targets he hit in his active skill. So that's really, really powerful, right? I think it's 15%. Herman's force skill, all poison, all commanders that are poison, is going to deal less damage to him, which also makes him really powerful. And then Luce, I think his force skill, whenever you hit a target with smite damage, they're going to deal 10% less all damage for X amount of time. Like really, really powerful. Okay, so does this really change the meta that much knowing this? Not yet so far, but it could help you make some more informed decisions. And at least for me personally, I was one of the strong advocates for a support tree. Like what I was advocating was that when you're doing duels, right, when you're staying connected to the target, you might be able to get a little bit more results out of the skill tree. But on the field, when you're taking a lot more skill damage from a lot of different people, you're engaging and disengaging, and you get a little bit of extra march speed, I would have preferred the support tree. Now I flipped that. I would actually prefer the skill tree. And then obviously Alex, ZL, Herman, and LC, they're all part of the meta right now for the most part. So it doesn't really change too much. But one is interesting to know. And then finally, I do want to give credit to Seawill. I don't know if he's the one that originally came up with it, but I actually first got this info from his video. So I want to give credit to him. If you watch all the way to the end and you haven't yet, please like and subscribe to the video. It really helps out the channel. And I'll talk to you guys next time.